Dubai was built to look untouchable. From a distance, it feels less like a city and more like a declaration. Towers rising out of the desert, artificial islands shaped by pure ambition, airports that never seem to sleep, ports that never stop moving, hotels glowing through the night like money has found a way to become architecture. For years, the world has been told the same story. Dubai is what happens when vision defeats geography, when ambition outruns history, when wealth becomes so powerful that even the desert has no choice but to surrender. But what if that story is incomplete? What if the city that looks most in control is actually one of the most exposed? What if the greatest weakness of Dubai is not hidden inside its skyline, its economy, or its politics, but in a narrow strip of water it does not own, cannot command, and may never truly escape? The Strait of Hormuz, a passage so small on the map that most people could miss it in seconds, and yet so important that if it begins to choke, one of the first places to feel the pressure may not be on the battlefield. It may be in the polished lobbies, the luxury terminals, the emptying hotels, the delayed cargo yards, and the silent confidence of Dubai. Because Dubai does not survive on what it produces. Dubai survives on what keeps arriving. Ships, goods, tourists, fuel, capital, confidence. That is the secret buried beneath the glass. Dubai is not simply a rich city. It is a city of flow. And the moment flow becomes uncertain, the illusion changes. People often imagine collapse as something loud. They imagine fire in the streets, sirens in the night, explosions on the skyline. They imagine a dramatic ending that leaves no room for doubt. But that is not how modern empires usually begin to fail. They fail quietly first, through hesitation, through rerouting, through fear calculated into spreadsheets, through premiums that rise before panic appears, through bookings that slow before headlines catch up, through wealthy people waiting just a little longer before committing, through the smallest change in behavior inside a system that depends entirely on movement. And that is why Hormuz matters. Not because it must close forever, but because it never has to close completely to hurt Dubai. It only has to remind the world that this glittering miracle sits closer to uncertainty than it likes to admit. So before we talk about the skyline, the airports, the ports, and the towers, we need to talk about what Dubai really is. Because once you understand that, you begin to see something disturbing. Dubai does not stand above geography. Dubai is trapped inside it. Dubai is often described as a city of the future, a place beyond old limits, a place that no longer needs oil, no longer fears instability, no longer plays by the same rules as the rest of the region. And that image has worked brilliantly. The world sees luxury, speed, and scale. But luxury can be misleading. Because beneath the surface, Dubai is not a fortress. It is an intersection, a transfer point, a brilliantly engineered crossroads where trade pauses, passengers connect, money settles, and goods move on. That is the genius of Dubai. But it is also the danger. A crossroads is only powerful while the roads stay open. The minute movement becomes uncertain, everything that looked permanent starts to feel strangely temporary. That is the paradox at the center of Dubai. Its strength comes from motion, which means its weakness comes from interruption. Look around the city and the pattern becomes obvious. The ports thrive because the routes remain active. The airport thrives because the skis remain open. The hotels thrive because the region feels safe enough to sell desire. The property market thrives because investors believe tomorrow will be richer than today. The malls thrive because shelves stay full and demand stays confident. Dubai does not just need wealth. It needs rhythm. It needs continuity. It needs the machinery of global trust to keep humming. And the Strait of Hormuz sits dangerously close to that machinery. A narrow maritime choke point between Iran and Oman, carrying not just energy but psychological stability for the wider Gulf. This is where the mistake begins. Most people hear Hormuz and think only of oil tankers. But Dubai's vulnerability is much larger than oil. Because even if Dubai is no longer defined by oil revenue, it is still defined by dependency on a region whose economic pulse is shaped by security, shipping, and uninterrupted confidence. And confidence is the first thing a choke point can poison. Imagine it carefully. Not a fantasy doomsday scenario. Not the end of the world. Just one serious crisis. One escalation. One incident large enough to shake the belief that Hormuz is safe enough. That is all it takes. The moment risk enters the equation, the city begins to change. Not on postcards, not in drone shots, but in the system beneath the image. And that is where our story begins. Day 1. The first day does not look like collapse. That is what makes it dangerous. The skyline is still glowing, tourists are still taking photos, the restaurants are still full, the elevators are still climbing, the fountains are still dancing beneath the towers as if nothing has changed. But somewhere out at sea, something happens. Maybe it is a strike, maybe it is a seizure, maybe it is a shipping incident, maybe it is simply enough tension to make the world understand that the Strait of Hormuz is no longer being treated as routine. And in that moment, the first cracks do not appear in concrete. They appear in calculations. Phones begin ringing in insurance offices. Shipping firms start emergency reviews. Risk analysts stop speaking in probabilities and begin speaking in costs. The sea does not need to be blocked by steel for the system to react. It only needs to become expensive enough to fear. This is the terrifying elegance of modern disruption. Nobody has to invade Dubai. Nobody has to bomb its skyline. Nobody has to storm its streets. They only have to poison the confidence of movement. Within hours, maritime insurance premiums spike. Cargo operators hesitate. Tankers slow down or reroute. Schedules that once looked precise begin to wobble. And once schedules wobble, a city like Dubai starts to feel something it hates more than anything else. Friction. Because Dubai's brand is built on the promise that everything works. Everything arrives. Everything moves. Everything connects. Everything feels smooth. But friction is the one thing this city cannot disguise for long. At the airport, the first signs are subtle. A route review here. A delay there. A sudden shift in airline risk planning. A tense conversation near a departure gate. A few travelers quietly wondering whether this was the wrong week to fly into the Gulf. No panic. Not yet. Just a mood. A thin film of uncertainty settling over a city that has always sold certainty like a luxury product. At Jebel Ali, the pressure is harder to hide. This is not just a port. It is one of the great engines of Dubai's rise. A place built on timing, precision, and the assumption that global movement can be turned into local power. But a port is only as strong as the confidence surrounding its routes. Once ships become cautious, once insurers become nervous, once logistics teams start gaming out worst-case scenarios, even the greatest port begins to look less like a machine and more like a question. Can a city still feel invincible when the arteries feeding it are already under stress? By nightfall on day 1, Dubai still looks magnificent. That is the deception. Because modern systems do not announce their weakness with smoke. They announce it with hesitation. And hesitation has entered the bloodstream. Day 7. A week later, the city is still standing. The lights are still on. The towers have not fallen. The beaches are still open. The brunches still exist. If you arrived with no context, you might even think the crisis had been exaggerated. But this is the point where Dubai begins to feel the suffocation of delay. The first week is where the elegant illusion of endless flow starts to lose its rhythm. Ships are waiting longer. Cargo schedules are no longer clean. Import costs begin climbing. Businesses that depend on smooth movement are suddenly forced into contingency mode. And contingency mode is a silent tax on everything. A city like Dubai can absorb stress for a while, but it cannot absorb uncertainty forever, because uncertainty affects every layer of the machine. Hotels begin to notice softer bookings. Not a collapse, just softness. The kind that makes executives stare a little longer at the numbers. A few tourists cancel. A few conferences postpone. A few luxury travelers choose another destination. Not because Dubai has become unlivable, but because the mood has changed. And mood matters more than people realize. Tourism is emotional. Travel is emotional. The decision to fly into a region under tension is not made only with facts. It is made with instinct. And instinct is fragile. At Dubai International Airport, that fragility becomes visible. The terminals are still active, but the atmosphere feels different. There is less swagger in the air. Less effortless confidence. More attention paid to screens. More questions asked at counters. More people watching the news between boarding calls. The airport, normally a monument to certainty, begins to mirror the anxiety of the region around it. And then the pressure reaches the city's daily life. Imported goods grow more expensive. Delivery timelines stretch. The tiny conveniences that once made Dubai feel superhuman begin to lose their precision. Nothing dramatic, not yet, but enough to make the city feel slightly less invincible. And in Dubai, slightly less invincible is not a small problem. Because the city does not merely sell comfort. It sells flawless execution. It sells the idea that money, logistics, ambition, and design have combined to create a place where chaos remains outside the frame. Now that frame is trembling. At Jebel Ali, the symbolism becomes almost cruel. The cranes are still tall. The yards are still vast. The infrastructure is still magnificent. But a machine without dependable flow is only an expensive sculpture. Dubai's miracle has always relied on the assumption that the world will keep moving through it. Now, for the first time, that assumption feels vulnerable. And when a city built on motion begins to slow, every industry starts listening for the sound of something deeper breaking. Day 14. 2 weeks into the crisis, Dubai is no longer dealing with an interruption. It is dealing with atmosphere. And atmosphere can be more dangerous than damage. Because damage can be measured. Atmosphere spreads. It changes the way people behave. It changes the way investors think. It changes the way workers plan. It changes the way families feel. The first thing to deteriorate is not infrastructure. It is confidence. The shelves are not empty everywhere, but prices are higher and timing is unreliable enough to trigger a new psychology. For a city built on imported abundance, even a hint of supply stress feels unnervingly personal. Luxury begins to reveal its hidden weakness. The people who came here for effortless living now find themselves noticing the effort. The imported food, the seamless retail experience, the easy assumption that everything can always be sourced from somewhere, suddenly all of it feels contingent. And contingency destroys the fantasy. This is the stage where Dubai's social reality begins to matter. Because beneath the glamour is a vast workforce. Executives, pilots, bankers, hospitality staff, drivers, engineers, retail workers, cleaners, construction laborers, service crews, people from all over the world keeping the city alive every hour of every day. Dubai has always functioned because millions believed in the bargain. Work hard, stay efficient, keep building, keep serving, keep moving, and in return the city keeps expanding. But what happens when expansion pauses? What happens when the machine that promised motion starts producing hesitation instead? A hotel manager begins to worry about occupancy. A restaurant owner worries about rising import costs. A logistics supervisor stares at revised schedules that no longer make sense. A property agent sees wealthy buyers delaying decisions. A corporate employee hears rumors of regional downsizing. A construction worker wonders which projects will quietly slow next. This is how a city starts feeling pressure from the inside. Not through one explosion, through thousands of private anxieties. And that is what makes Dubai uniquely exposed. Because Dubai is not just a place. It is a confidence ecosystem. Each person believes because the system appears to work. The system appears to work because each person continues believing. Break that loop, and even the strongest skyline begins to look strangely theatrical. By day 14, the emotional geometry of the city has changed. The towers still rise, but they feel less like monuments and more like obligations. The malls still shine, but underneath, the brightness is a new nervousness. The airport still functions, but movement now carries tension. The marinas still glitter, but glamour cannot fully silence the sense that the region has shifted. Can a city remain a dream once people begin treating it like a risk? That is the question now hanging over Dubai. And unlike a missile, a question cannot be intercepted. Day 30. A month into the crisis, the real threat is no longer the strait itself. The real threat is what the strait has exposed. Dubai was never built only on money. It was built on belief. Belief that this city was the safest bet in a volatile region. Belief that it could keep attracting capital no matter what happened around it. Belief that its future was too polished, too connected, too ambitious to be interrupted by something as old-fashioned as geography. Now that belief is under review. The real estate market is the first place where this becomes impossible to hide. Luxury property does not survive on square footage alone. It survives on future confidence. Buyers are not purchasing walls and glass. They are purchasing a vision of tomorrow. But if tomorrow begins to look unstable, then even the most beautiful apartment becomes harder to justify. A penthouse is impressive. But what is a penthouse worth in a city that suddenly feels exposed to forces beyond its control? Investors start waiting. Then more investors start waiting. Then prices stop reflecting only ambition and begin reflecting doubt. And doubt is where glamour starts to bleed. At the airport, the symbolism becomes brutal. Airports are places of momentum. Places that tell the story of a city through motion. Arrivals, departures, connections, flow. Dubai International Airport has always felt like proof that the city sits at the center of the world. But now imagine standing there 1 month into a prolonged Hormuz crisis. The terminals still operate, but the mood is thinner. The confidence is no longer automatic. Some flights are gone, some routes are reduced, some passengers are leaving earlier than planned, others are not coming at all. The airport still works, but it no longer feels invincible. And if the airport stops feeling invincible, what does that say about the city it represents? At Jebel Ali, the cost of prolonged uncertainty becomes even clearer. Clients adapt. Supply chains explore alternatives. Competitors in other regions sense opportunity. Because the global economy is ruthless. It does not wait for wounded hubs to recover. It reroutes around them. This is the part many cities never fully recover from. Not the immediate shock, the behavioral shift that follows. Once companies learn to diversify away from risk, once travelers begin associating a destination with tension, once investors see hesitation where they once saw inevitability, rebuilding the old aura becomes painfully difficult. And Dubai lives on aura almost as much as infrastructure. By day 30, nobody needs to say the word collapse out loud. The city may still be functioning. The roads may still be full. The skyline may still look extraordinary at sunset. But the spell has weakened. People now understand something they were never supposed to feel so clearly. Dubai is not beyond the map. It is trapped inside one. A map where narrow routes matter. A map where regional tension can leak into perception. A map where one maritime chokepoint can send fear through finance, tourism, logistics, aviation, and property all at once. And that is the deepest danger of Hormuz. Not that it destroys Dubai in one dramatic blow, but that it forces the world to see the city differently. And cities built on prestige cannot afford to be seen differently for long. Because once the illusion cracks, even slightly, every pillar starts carrying more weight. Trade has to work harder. Tourism has to reassure. Real estate has to justify. Aviation has to project stability. Government has to calm nerves. Business has to defend confidence. And confidence, once wounded, never returns in the same form. So no, the end of Dubai may not arrive as a cinematic apocalypse. No instant darkness. No final explosion. No single moment where the city simply disappears into the sand. That is not how this works. The real nightmare is more sophisticated than that. The real nightmare is a slow loss of certainty in a city that depends on certainty more than most places on Earth. A city built on constant motion meeting a world that no longer moves smoothly. A city built on premium trust being forced to live under premium doubt. A city built to look eternal suddenly being reminded that all modern empires, no matter how rich, still kneel before chokepoints. And perhaps that is the cruelest truth of all. Dubai did not defeat geography. It only outshined it for a while. But geography is patient. It waits beneath the glass, beneath the steel, beneath the luxury, beneath the branding, beneath the illusion of total control. And when the route tightens, when the premiums rise, when the schedules slip, when the region feels one crisis too close, geography finally speaks again. The question is not whether Dubai can survive one shock. Of course it can. The question is what remains of the myth after the shock is over. What remains when the city still stands, but no longer feels untouchable? What remains when the lights are still on, but everybody knows they depend on forces far beyond the skyline? What remains when the dream is still visible, but the certainty underneath it has started to rot? Maybe that is what Hormuz really threatens. Not the existence of Dubai, but the belief that Dubai is immune. And in a city built on belief, That may be the most dangerous crisis of all.